Okay, so this is part two of this series in Monster Hunt, but it's our first actual coding stage. So if we want to have a look initially at our HTML file, like I said before, we're going to actually use JavaScript to create the canvas element this time, which is just a different technique. It's a different way of doing it, rather than creating a canvas element in your HTML. You can actually add them on the fly in JavaScript, which is just a valid technique. You'll see either work. So all our HTML needs to do is just load our basic HTML template and use a script tag to link to our JavaScript file. It's as simple as that. That's all our HTML is going to do. And you'll also see there's no CSS here, so I'm not doing any fancy styling of this application. This is focusing on what we can do with our JavaScript. So as a bit of a different technique, using our canvas, we can create our canvas using a JavaScript on the fly. So var canvas, which is what we saw when we looked at our canvas example programming class. But we can use, rather than the go and get the element, we would use get element by ID as our method if we already had a canvas created in HTML, but we don't. So we want to actually create the element. So you can use document.createElement, and tell it we want to create a canvas element, which will go and actually create on the fly our canvas tag in HTML. So it's just a different method of doing the same thing. We still need to set our context. So I'm going to use CTX as my variable for setting the context, and we're working in the 2D context. Because we're creating our canvas on the fly this time, and we're not setting the width and the height of that canvas in HTML in the HTML tag, canvas.width of 512 pixels by canvas.height of 480 pixels. We're going to set that as a part of our creation of the canvas. And if we see where do we get those elements from, well, if you happen to go to the background image, you'll see that 512 by 480 is exactly the dimensions of the background image that we want to put on that canvas eventually when we get to that stage. So that's why we've set those. And then we actually want to attach this canvas element that we've constructed. So we've constructed a canvas element in 2D with a width and a height. We now want to attach this as a HTML element to our HTML page using document.body.appendChild, because we are appending a child tag inside of the body tag, which is a canvas, our canvas tag up here. We're attaching that with our properties of our width and height in our 2D context. So that will actually create that element on the fly for us. And then once we've done that, we're just going to follow a pretty basic looping structure where we're going to use a set of functions which are pretty normal in applications written using the canvas. And we call this a game loop because we use a set of functions and we essentially loop through these set of functions, running them until our conditions stop, until our game ends. Which in this case I've actually got no real end to this. It can continue going on forever because that's one of they just want to focus on the simple elements of getting the basics working, and keyboard control and collision detection and those sort of basic things. But a basic game loop starts with where we look at, well, what's the state of the world need to look like? Where are we positioning our objects? What's going on? What are we listening for? And then we're going to have some response to some keyboard events in this case, which is going to change the state of the world. So we continue to update the state of the world. What does it look like? Where do our characters move to? What's different now? And each time we update, we're going to need to render or draw. Sometimes you'll see this function called draw because we're drawing the newly changed state of the world, reflecting things that have moved. But we still need a main line that's going to control the flow of our program. So we're still going to have a main function or some sort of a function that's controlling it. You might see different names. I'm just going to call mine main, which is using some concepts of when do we want our updates to happen? How often do we want our updates to happen? So, and we need to measure how long has it been since the last time our world was updated. What's the last time it was rendered? So we need to use some JavaScript methods to help us do that. We're going to use a date.now method, which tells us what is the date right now. And it measures it in milliseconds since some date back in 1970, but it gives us a timestamp in milliseconds of what's the date and time right now. And we can use that to figure out how long has it been then since the last time our game was rendered. So we're chasing the change in that time. So we call that delta. Delta means change. It's a Greek letter of the alphabet, means, and we use it in maths for change. How long has it been since now, when we got our date now, and since the last time we rendered it, and we want to get that time in seconds, so that we're going to divide that by 1,000 to do that. And we then send that value up to our update function and call it with that value to tell it how long it has been, because it wants to know, and it's going to use that value as a part of what it does. And then we call our render function again. So this is where we're starting to loop through our functions. We're continually updating, and then we're continually drawing, and then we need to know, well, we've only just rendered again, so we set our last render value to right now, because we only just rendered it. So now when our main line runs again, now will be the value of when we just last rendered it, and we'll be looking at, well, how long's it been since that time? And to make our animation a little smoother, you can use timers for this stuff. But there's actually, with the canvas, came a new method called request animation frame, which is, there's actually a spelling mistake there, request animation frame, which is a method that produces smoother animation, works really well with the canvas. You see it used a lot with the canvas, and it does a similar sort of thing to the timer, but it's just better for animation. So we're going to make use of that, and it renders, it has a default, I think, of rendering every 60 seconds, every 60 milliseconds. Sorry, you don't have to tell it how often to render. Those things are kind of built in, and you get a better, smoother animation using request animation frame. But we still need to tell it what to do every time the animation frame is requested, and we want to continually run our mainline function, which is looping through our update, having checked how long it's been since the last one, then drawing the new state of the world, figuring out, okay, what set the last update to now, and let's go again. Okay, so that's our game loop that is very, very common when we're working with the canvas, putting our state of our world in a particular function, continuing to draw that state of the world, and then looping through those functions using a mainline function to control how frequently that happens. So that's our basic process. So you need to spend a little bit of time, if I make that a little bit smaller so you can see all of that code, going back through and making sure you have all of that code written, so that we can get ready and move on to the next stage, where we're going to start to look at adding our images and our game objects into our world.